Good afternoon. The House Small Business Committee oversight regulations responsible for the federal program that affect businesses, including programs like the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and Paycheck Protection Program that are cornerstones of the federal government's economic response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The SBA's implementation and congressional oversight of more than $700 billion in relief provided thus far is vital for the survival of Main Street businesses across the country. I'd like to start by thanking the SBA Inspector General Hannibal Mike Ware for participating today. The Office of the Inspector General provides independent and objective oversight to improve the integrity, accountability, and performance of the SBA and its programs for the benefit of the American people. That work takes on heightened importance now as the agency is tasked with the responsibility of providing crucial assistance to millions of small businesses during these unprecedented and challenging times. The SBA IG recently updated its 2020 oversight plan and on April 24th, 2020, initiated its planned review of the Paycheck Protection Program. Today, we will be discussing the flash report released last week, highlighting several instances where Treasury and SBA continue to stray from the intent of Congress in implementing the Paycheck Protection Program. As Americans stay home to contain COVID-19, businesses across the country have been forced to furlough employees or, in too many cases, shut down permanently. This has left millions of Americans out of work and unable to put food on the table or pay their bills. Last week, we learned that the U.S. economy lost over 20 million jobs in the month of April alone, bringing the unemployment rate to 14.7%. And yesterday, we learned that another 3 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. To date, Congress has appropriated over $670 billion for the PPP to ensure that small businesses and eligible nonprofits could secure the financing they need to survive the mandated closures resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic without laying off their employees. To date, while we recognize that the implementation of these new programs is a tall order for a small agency, critical problems emerged with the initial rollout of the Paycheck Protection Program. In the initial phase, piecemeal guidance and fact sheets from Treasury and SBA were often confusing, contradictory, and providing little clarity for small businesses. In particular, the first come, first serve rule allowed large banks to prioritize their largest existing clients and turn away countless of the smallest businesses, many of whom were longtime customers. The SBA's interim final rule also required that 75% of PPP loan proceeds be used for payroll expenses, which is not in the statute. And despite receiving $25 million to provide COVID-19 materials and resources in non-English languages, SBA has been far too slow in implementing this funding and risks leaving business owners with limited English proficiency behind. To address these issues, I led a letter with the chairwoman and 36 other members of Congress calling on the SBA and Treasury to take action by issuing new rules to require PPP lenders to treat all applications equally. And HR 6800, the HEROES Act, would mandate that SBA immediately take action to provide in-language resources. In the second round of funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, House Democrats fought for and made critical improvements to strengthen the program to ensure it was working for the businesses who need relief most. The Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act increased the role of mission-based lenders, such as community banks, minority development institutions, and community development financial institutions, to expand opportunities for women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. Specifically, by setting aside funding for these institutions, those that are deeply embedded in towns and cities across the country, we address some of the administration's shortcoming with the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program by prioritizing programs for Main Street small businesses, self-employed individuals, and independent contractors, regardless of their prior banking status. However, as the second round of fundings are being dispersed, the flash report issued by the OIG indicated that still more work needs to be done. Section 1102 of the CARES Act states SBA should issue guidance to lenders and agents to ensure that small businesses in underserved and rural markets, along with women, minority, and veteran-owned firms, are prioritized. The IG report stated that, quote, they did not find any evidence that SBA issued any guidance to prioritize, unquote, those underserved markets and businesses, and because SBA did not, these businesses, quote, may not have received the loans as intended, unquote. Equally troubling is the fact that SBA did not require demographic data of borrowers to identify if these loans are being made in underserved markets, making it difficult for SBA to determine if loans went to women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. This is likely why SBA and Treasury have only reported top-line data and not the comprehensive data that Congress needs. However, it's not too late to change course. I strongly urge the SBA to implement the OIG's recommendation that optional demographic data be included on forms used to request loan forgiveness for already disbursed loans. And I introduced legislation to require the SBA to collect and report demographic data that is disaggregated by race. That way, we can start to see a full picture of who is receiving these loans, where they are located, and the amount awarded. The flash report also states that the SBA's interim final rule did not align with the allowable use requirements for PPP loans. The IFR added a requirement that 75% of the loans be used for payroll and requires non-forgiven loans be paid back within 2 years, despite the CARES Act allowing for repayment within 10 years. Because of these two rules, tens of thousands of small businesses may not have the loans forgiven and then will be required to pay the loans back within 2 years. This is simply unacceptable. These are just a couple of the issues addressed in the flash report. I look forward to hearing more from Mr. Ware and others on the committee. I expect that we will have a robust discussion today on the flash report, while also discussing how his office is coordinating with other inspectors general and additional upcoming reports from the SBA IG. I'd like to now recognize Ranking Member Mr. Spano for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that very much. Today's briefing to review the Small Business Administration's Office of Inspector General's flash report on the rollout of the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program is the first step in bringing oversight and transparency that the American people deserve. I've heard countless stories that small businesses have demonstrated resilience and determination and service throughout this pandemic. We've watched businesses from our district and all over the state of all sizes struggle to receive the loans, yet continue to pay their employees while adhering to new safety requirements. It's important to remember, however, that during the stay-at-home orders, the SBA has approved more than 4.2 million loans totaling over $530 million, or billion that is, dollars. Task that they were assigned is unrivaled by anything in the agency's history, and they did it as quickly and efficiently as possible, I believe, given the circumstances. But as we evaluate improvements to the program, we must keep in mind the millions of small businesses and workers behind the program and our responsibility to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. With 311,567 loans totaling over $31 billion in my home state of Florida, I greatly appreciate swift action taken by the SBA to approve these loans, and I am committed to making sure that each loan maximizes our economic recovery. Despite these successes, however, the Paycheck Protection Program is not without growing pains. Hundreds of constituents in my district have contacted my office over the last several weeks expressing frustration that they had difficulties applying for PPP loans, that the guidance for the program was unclear, that the rules delineating how much may be forgiven were continually changing. And while many of these issues, I think, are the natural consequence of rolling out a program this massive, this rapidly, I am eager to hear the recommendations of Inspector General Mike Ware on how we can amend existing practices and build on the good work that the SBA has been doing. The SBA OIG is required to deter, identify, and investigate instances of fraud, waste, abuse, and inefficiencies in SBA programs and operations. And the SBA Inspector General Mike Ware is an asset to the agency, to Congress, and to the American people. And so while local, state, and federal oversight mechanisms begin to ramp up, the SBA OIG has already shifted into overdrive. And I have full confidence in Inspector General Ware and his team to lead the SBA oversight efforts, and I'm committed to making sure that they have the resources that are necessary to do so. Finally, I'd like to take just a moment to personally thank the staff of the Small Business Committee and the Small Business Administration who have consistently worked with my office tirelessly to respond to this crisis and to provide us and our constituents with up-to-date information on this program. Specifically, I want to thank Joe Hartz, Rob Yabor, and Delia Barr on the Small Business Committee. And I also would like to thank Ryan Lambert with the Small Business Administration for their tireless work these last few weeks. I am really, truly grateful, and my constituents are as well. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Spano. The gentleman yields back. I would like to take a minute to explain the timing rules. Mr. Ware will have 5 minutes for remarks, and the members will get 5 minutes for questioning. Even in this virtual forum, we ask that you stay within that time frame to the best of your ability. I would now like to introduce the Honorable Hannibal Mike Ware, the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration. Mr. Ware was sworn in as the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration in May 2018. He is responsible for independent oversight of SBA's programs and operations, which now encompasses oversight of the Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Programs. Mr. Ware has 28 years of experience within the OIG community and has received numerous awards throughout his career, including several awards from the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency as recognition for his very significant work in the Inspector General community. Welcome, Mr. Ware. Mr. Ware, you are recognized now for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Chu, Ranking Member Spano. I also have to recognize Chairwoman Velázquez and Ranking Member CHABOT. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today and for your continued support of my office. I am always proud to represent the dedicated men and women of my office and to speak to you about our important work. On April 15th, my office released its supplemental oversight plan for 2020 to address immediate oversight needs related to SBA's substantial stimulus programs. It has been said that nothing short of the nation's economic well-being is at stake in the success of these programs. As you know, the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, utilizes SBA's lending partners across the nation to facilitate this vast lending. SBA reported the initial round of unprecedented lending authority was exhausted in just 14 days, which is equivalent to SBA's normal lending rates combined for 14 years. Over $200 billion has already been exhausted in the second round of lending. My office recognized at the outset that Congress intended for this unprecedented lending authority to happen rapidly. We were the first Office of Inspector General in the federal government to issue reports pertaining to oversight of the COVID-19 stimulus. Notably, before the first PPP loan was even made, we issued reports on risk awareness and lessons learned from prior audits of economic stimulus and economic injury disaster loans, with a third report pertaining to SBA's entrepreneurial development programs issued in the weeks following. It was unsurprising that the reported challenges SBA's lenders experienced prior to the start of lending were for not having timely or clear guidelines. This was a risk area and lesson learned that my office reported to stakeholders in the report on economic stimulus loans. This risk area and lesson learned was communicated to those stakeholders in separate reports long before the COVID-19 stimulus loan was made. We also have ongoing reviews of SBA's implementation Guaranteed lenders to increase awareness of these potential scams and fraud schemes. This work continues along with our partnerships with the U.S. attorneys and law enforcement organizations across the nation. I am proud to share with you that on May 5th, first in the nation charges against individuals fraudulently seeking PPP loans was announced. My office led this investigation and collaborated with our law enforcement partners to achieve this outcome. Additionally, our office has collaborated with SBA's OCIO and other federal agencies to investigate suspicious websites that may target the public for fraud or identity theft. Our efforts have resulted in website removals, with other sites and email addresses being under active investigation. My office received $25 million in supplemental funds to provide oversight through September 30th, 2024. This is both welcome and warranted, though the nature of our oversight suggests that ideally these funds would be available until expended, as fraud cases manifest themselves over time and investigations can be multi-year in nature. I am most concerned about my permanent staffing levels going forward, as our annual base budget does not allow my office to have 100% planned staffing on board, and the disaster loans made by SBA can perform in a loan portfolio for decades. Nonetheless, my office is poised to provide oversight of SBA. As a statutory member of the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency's Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, otherwise known as the PRAC, I look forward to working with my Inspector General colleagues to leverage the collective power of joint oversight efforts to increase transparency of SBA stimulus assistance. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes of questions. Inspector General Ware, your flash report noted that SBA's implementation of the PPP did not align with the CARES Act's objective of prioritizing underserved and rural markets. What explanation, if any, did SBA provide as to why it did not issue guidance to lenders to prioritize underserved and rural markets, including women, veteran, and minority-owned businesses, and instead implemented a first-come, first-served policy? And what are your recommendations on a going-forward basis as to how we can get that guidance so that PPP loans get to more underserved businesses?
Great, thank you for your question. Well, the explanation given, we actually got the explanation after the report was out. I like to say that, but according to SBA looks at it like they actually did try to prioritize lending. They spoke to CDFIs and MDIs and the CDCs, and they sent emails out encouraging them to provide loans. But we maintain that that was not guidance to the lenders to do so. And we also maintain that those are not the only lending institutions that underserved markets used. The major banks are used as well. And we were unable, even to this date, to see any guidance that was provided to the large lenders to prioritize those loans. So I mean, our findings, it was not intended to diminish the outreach by SBA, but it does not evidence guidelines to lenders to prioritize loans. And we're not certain why that guidance wasn't given. But again, in the eyes of SBA, they did what they thought was necessary at the time.
But what should be done on a going forward basis?
Well, first of all, on a going forward basis, they need to provide that guidance to lenders, specific guidance on how they're expected to provide these services to underserved individuals and rural settings. Secondly, they need to be able to track to even know if they met that mandate or not. Right now, based on what is set up, there's nothing, no way that they would know who the loans went to.
So that gets to my next question, which is the borrower application form did not include the standard optional demographic data on the application form, thus preventing Congress from getting a full picture of which businesses are receiving PPP loans. And that means that the SBA did not follow up on the mandate of the CARES Act. Why did this happen? And what needs to be done now to make sure that this demographic data is collected so that we know that there is a prioritization of the underserved small businesses?
So let me start at the beginning of the question. So at this time, we haven't met with SBA officials or received documentation indicated that they have made or intend to make changes to those data collection processes related to PPP borrower demographics. I know that as of May 11th, when we looked last, probably as of now, they had not issued comprehensive guidance on the process for loan, even for the loan forgiveness part under the section 1106. So we're saying that since you haven't done that, we suggested that you do make it part of that in terms of the loan forgiveness. You could collect your data at that time.
If we are able to have it on the loan forgiveness forms, can we then collect the information that was not collected thus far? Do you think it will remedy it?
I believe that it is one of the ways to remedy it. I haven't met with them yet, but I know this. We're intending to meet with SBA officials as part of our ongoing inspection, and we'll continue to review those programmatic changes. But I know that these are discussions that need to be had internally between my office and SBA to make sure that we get at the overall goal of ensuring that the underserved markets are served and that they know who has been served in those underserved markets.
And finally, let me just make a statement that we had a directive that there be SBA's translation of all the materials in the 10 most commonly spoken non-English language. But more than 6 weeks after the enactment of the CARES Act, there is not a full translation. And these delays are jeopardizing the ability of millions to access benefits. I would urge you, as the Inspector General, to investigate the administration's handling of this provision in the law and the impact that it had on non-English speaking small business owners.
Chairman Chu, I think so based on what I know on what was done for us by the agency, because we utilized them in assisting us with our webpage and the fraud alerts that we put out to the public, the agency translated that into 18 different languages. And we have that's out on their site. And when they were doing that, I believe that was looped into their efforts to meet that mandate, to translate their things. It might have been done already. I'm not 100% sure because I didn't look for myself, but I do believe that it's possible that it was done because ours is done.
Yeah, I did see it, but we've been tracking it almost every day. It came relatively recently, like within the last week. And yet all these applications have been out. So that's why I am urging for you to look into this. Okay, my time is now expired. And now the ranking member, Mr. Spano, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. Inspector General Ware, as Chairwoman Chu has mentioned, when the Paycheck Protection Program was first instituted, some of the larger banks who were previously registered with the SBA as 7A lenders already were able to enroll as PPP lenders more quickly than other small lenders, certainly those who weren't approved SBA lenders already. Those that had less experience with the SBA programs. And additionally, because there was no guidance that had been issued on the topic, many of the banks began issuing loans to their existing clients first. Given that the rate at which PPP funds are being allocated in this second tranche has slowed significantly. Do you believe that many, if not most of those many if not most of the eligible small businesses that had difficulty applying initially at the onset, do you believe that they have now had an opportunity to apply for PPP?
Okay, thank you for that question. That's a difficult question. So I had meetings with Administrator Carranza just this week, and I know that SBA believes that definitely is the case. But keep in mind that we're currently conducting a review of this, and part of the objective of that review is to assess guidance provided to the lenders and the staff. So we're going to review that type of guidance to see if on the second go around how these things work. So we're going to be looking at guidance and bank policy related questions to the lenders on a survey that we're going to do. But actually testing the practices at individual bank institutions, though, I don't believe that's part of what we're doing in this particular inspection. It's a real tough question to answer. I know that SBA believes that they have fixed that in my conversations with Administrator Carranza.
Yeah. Thank you. I will just say in my kind of anecdotal experiences, as constituents were communicating with me, I was getting a lot of the complaints that they weren't able to access any lender who had submitted application for those reasons. But now that complaint has subsided. I haven't heard that complaint in the last week or two. So I think what we'll find is probably most of those people, or many of them certainly have now been able to access PPP. In your analysis of the program, how has the SBA been incorporating small business and lender concerns in drafting and issuing guidance? And I guess my question is the SBA being responsive to questions and concerns regarding ambiguity?
Okay, let me say this. That's not something that we have looked into at this point, but I could tell you anecdotally from my experience. So we're getting, as an office, a ton of these, the same type of concerns that you would get from your constituents. They send them to us as well. And we have set up a pipeline where it goes to a specific person within SBA. As it comes to us, it's addressed. They acknowledge that they received it. And I think for the most part, at least I know of definitely a handful that's been sent over the past week or so, that they do deal with these people head on. Whether or not that rolls up into the regulations that they put out, we have not looked into that yet. But I know that they're addressing them as they come in. And like you mentioned earlier, I mean, the deluge that comes at them is at an incredible pace. And I would say, I know that they were working around the clock, 24 hours, 8-hour shifts, and all this, trying to get all this done.
All right, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. The chairwoman was talking about the prioritization of underrepresented groups, and you had mentioned that you felt like that the SBA had not really given guidance to the larger lenders regarding what priority looks like, what that is. My question to you is, what, in your opinion, or do you have an opinion about what priority is? What should that require the SBA to do?
Well, you know, an IG is out on a limb when you ask to opine on something like this, especially a guy like me who has many opinions. But I would think that the type of guidance would have been to, well, if you deal with the underserved and disadvantaged individuals, chances are they didn't exactly have those type of relationships with a bank that would have facilitated them getting in on the front end. So some of one of the steps that was taken the second go round was that SBA made it a certain period of time where those type of loans had preference. And I mean, I don't know if something like that would have been helpful, but SBA certainly thinks that it would have been helpful by instituting that this time around. That could have been one, but just some guidance. But it's a tricky thing for them, because when they're looking at the act and we say you didn't align, they will say that what you're referring to was in the sense of the Senate, and that's not necessarily the law, like we were supposed to do it. So when you say align, sense of the Senate, so we have that back and forth, but I know for a fact that they took the sense of the Senate important enough to put those type of things in on the second round.
I see. Thank you. My time is up. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chairwoman Chu, you might be on mute. I think you were talking.
Huh.
Okay. Yeah.
No.
So now Ms. Velázquez, our chair of our Small Business Committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu and Ranking Member Spano for holding this important hearing. And Mr. Chabot, Ranking Member, thank you so much for being part of this important, not hearing, forum. Mr. Ware, thank you so much, Inspector General, for spending time to brief us and to discuss with us where we are regarding PPP. It is important that not only the SBA move to put money into the hand of those who need it most, small businesses, but we have the responsibility to make sure that that they do it the right way and that they comply with the rules and regulations and observe ways of fraud and abuse in rolling out the program. So when we look at how fast the first tranche of money was basically disbursed and the loans were approved, they were approving loans $2 billion per hour. And now that that pace has slowed down. We have anecdotal stories that is doing better in terms of reaching out to the small entities that need it the most. And of course, that happened because we fought to bring in new lenders, those mission-based lenders like CDFI, those who have deep ties in communities, rural America, and urban cities. But Mr. Ware, I am concerned over initial reports that an outside share of PPP loans were going to areas that were not as severely impacted by the spread of COVID-19 as others. Is your office looking into whether loan processes, certifications, and approvals were all made in compliance with SBA regulations and policies and were uniform across all lenders?
Yes, thank you for that question. We certainly are. That's definitely a part of this review that's going on. We have a data analytics group that's been doing great work internally for us. That's how we've been able to put out some of the work that we have so far, especially on the criminal investigation side. And these are the type of things that they are definitely looking into.
Thank you. Mr. Ware, the SBA interim rule, final rule, created what I will refer to as the 75-25 loan forgiveness rule. Your review of the data indicated tens of thousands of businesses may not be able to meet this test due to the nature of their business. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes. So the interim rule made it so that in order to be forgiven, 75% had to be used for payroll purposes. What we found when looking through the data and analyzing the data was that what borrowers said that they would be using this money for, a great deal of it was for overhead expenses and other business related expenses that didn't have to do with payroll, we found that many businesses have more of those type of expenses than actual payroll expenses. What would happen in this case?
Let me ask you, sir, was the 75-25 in the underlying CARES Act language?
No, it was not.
That is right. And I expect the administration to ease the burden for small businesses with updated guidance. But just in case that is, I wanted to make sure that they understand that was not the intent of Congress. And this time around, on the bill that we're voting on today, we included the elimination of the 75-25. Because if we're going to say that we're going to provide access to capital to small businesses, then we cannot hinder them by imposing regulations that will not make any economic and financial sense for the businesses that we are trying to help. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I yield back. My time has expired.
The gentlelady yields back. And now the ranking member of our Small Business Committee, Mr. Chabot, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Chu and Ranking Member Spano for putting this together today. I want to thank the General for being here with us. And I want to commend members, both Republicans and Democrats on this committee for their participation, their involvement in the existence of the PPP program and putting it together. It has helped, well, we know over 4 million small businesses all across America, and more importantly, all those employees who work for those small businesses, because as we all know, half of the people who work in America work for a small business. So so an awful lot of people were helped. Now, was it all smooth sailing from the start? Absolutely not. There were long lines and portals that got closed down and a whole range of things. But basically, from passage and the president signing this legislation to loans actually being made by the private sector, it was 1 week, which is pretty incredible time. And it's gotten better. And it was so popular, obviously, the money was exhausted and we had to replenish that fund a couple of weeks back. So I just want to commend all the members, really Republicans and Democrats, and the staffs who were involved. I want to call out especially Joe Hartz and Rob Yaver for their hard work. And I can't tell you the number of hours on the phone that we've had with other members and various groups all across America and small businesses and lenders and you name it, in trying to assist them in this effort. So thank you out there to so many people. Now, you, General, just a couple of quick questions. First of all, given the close collaboration between the Treasury Department and the SBA, could you kind of describe as a practical matter how you're coordinating with the Treasury Department folks and how is that working out?
Sure. So it's important to know, I mean, you well know, but I have to say that my authority rests within SBA. So the acting IG, Rich Delmar for Treasury, and I are both members of the PRAC, the Pandemic Recovery and Accountability Committee. So we work together to make sure that we're in alignment in terms of some of the things that we're talking about. The Treasury wouldn't have been included at all in the flash report because we just had like 2 weeks to be responsive to the specific ask of the Congress to put that together. So we went straight down the middle in terms of what the CARES Act said and what was put out for quickness. But future reports and future reviews definitely has to take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
My next question, do you think the SBA is going to be able to handle kind of the surge in demand for resources that we've seen, especially over the long term? Is there planning that's going to have to go into this to make sure that they're able to efficiently serve the public and those small businesses across America who really need these loans in the future?
Fortunately, the Congress gave SBA a significant amount of money to be able to ramp up in order to deal with this. I know that it takes a while, of course, to ramp up, to get people in, to do the type of job that they're going to have to do. But I mean, you know, my job is oversight, and I will tell you still that it's impressive that SBA's employees, and that goes even to SBA OIG's employees, have really stepped up in terms of like really caring for this mission and pushing forward. They're working 24 hours around the clock to try to get this done. And, you know, that's to be commended. Now, of course, the cavalry has to come in at some point. This can't be sustained. And I do believe that, I know for a fact that they're in the process of bringing the type of resources in that should be able to meet this challenge.
Thank you very much. I see my time's about to expire, so I'll yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. And now the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Can you hear me all right?
No.
I see Congresswoman David just shaking your head, yes. Okay, very good. Well, Madam Chair, thanks for having me on the call. Ironically, when I was participating in these forums, just in the past couple of days and last week from Maine, I had no problem getting into the system here and participating face to face. Now that I find myself in my Washington office, I realize I'm lacking the necessary equipment, although I'm just down the hall from our normal committee room. So something that I will work on, but I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this important oversight forum. Mr. Ware, I wanted to ask you about the 75-25 rule, but I think that Chairwoman VELÁZQUEZ did a great job and really drove home the importance of getting, clarifying on that issue and getting to the bottom of the problems that it causes. So instead, I wanted to ask you a little bit about loan forgiveness and guidance from the SBA, which was supposed to be released no later than 30 days following enactment. And I wanted to ask, what types of problems do you foresee or concerns do you have about how this might impact loan borrowers lacking a full awareness of what they need to do in order to ensure loan forgiveness? I'm very concerned that some people may feel like the rules of the game have been changed on them after the fact, and that it could have pretty bad consequences for some small businesses.
Right. Well, thank you for that question. I share the same concern. That is what our next report that's coming out deals with the loan forgiveness part of it. And that report should be out in less than 15 days. It's important to note, though, that we learned from SBA that they are going to put out the interim rules on loan forgiveness, much clearer rules. And that we were expecting, quite frankly, probably today, but who knows, maybe it's next week or something. But they said that something was coming to deal with this. The main issue we find with loan forgiveness, we spoke about in the flash report. And that is that although SBA has regulatory discretion, since the Act said that repayment period could be anywhere between 2 and 10 years, it impacts the loan forgiveness part of it, because any part that's not forgiven will have to be paid back in a short 2-year repayment period. And we all know that if there's a large amount of money to be paid over 24 months or less, that payment is going to be massive, which could really damage the small businesses we were trying.
Mr. Ware, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm very worried for our small mom and pop shops. That scenario could drive them out of business, and that would be a terrible loss in many communities. I also just wanted to, with the last minute I have here, ask, is it your understanding that the CARES Act PPP loan forgiveness requirements already instruct SBA to prorate the portion of the loan that can be forgiven according to the retention of employees and employee pay, because I've heard a lot of people express concern that this is either full forgiveness or no forgiveness.
No, well, that's not my understanding. My understanding was that the act was pretty clear, although SBA did have regulatory discretion once the act said things like between X and Y. So SBA thought that they had data that would demonstrate that in 8 weeks, folks should be back to normal in terms of that. So that's why they did the 75-25. They did it based on a formula that had something to do with 8 weeks. So, I mean, they did make their decision based on the data they had.
Well, thank you for your interpretation. I just want to note that for the committee. I think, no one knew when this was passed what things were going to look like after 8 weeks. And I think with some businesses still being shut down, by having taken out these loans, it puts them at great risk of missing out on that loan forgiveness, even if they've, been able to bring back a large portion of their workforce.
Right.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to be with you all today. Inspector General Ware, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your statement and your times. As you know, and I'm going to state the obvious, the Paycheck Protection Program loans they've been a great success and helped millions of businesses nationwide. Upwards of 50 million people stayed in their jobs as opposed to going to the unemployment lines, which will help us quickly recover, or more quickly recover for sure. I would also say, however, due to the swift implementation of the PPP, the SBA's role out of guidance has been confusing, to say the least. I think you would agree with that, the ever-changing rules. I understand the complexity of this situation. We have caused 20 years worth of work to be done in about 8 weeks for SBA, and that's no easy task for anyone, much less a government entity that's having to stand this up and work through some different processes. We appreciate, you just alluded to all the work that's been going on and the dedication to your teams that have worked around the clock to help small businesses and help employees stand up an opportunity to keep them in the job. And we really appreciate this. And basically they did it with very little rules, as it actually started on the night before the loan started, which is, I guess, just in time rules. How's that? Instead, the SBA has had a series of released FAQs and tweets from the administrator to guide American business owners and employees through this hectic and confusing time. Further adding to this confusion, multiple releases of questions have contradicted themselves. For instance, question 17 on the document explains that borrowers and lenders may rely on the laws, rules, and guidance available at the time of the relevant application. Based on the CARES Act and original guidance from SBA, this would mean that small businesses did not have to pass the, quote, credit elsewhere test that SBA normally applies. Many businesses applied for PPP with this understanding. However, the SBA subsequently published new FAQs on April 23rd, which explained that businesses with, quote, adequate sources of liquidity, end quote, did not qualify for the loan. And you applied it to all businesses, even those that had already received the loan. This hurt business owners, good owners, who have executed the correct practices to help build up their savings, credit rating, and other aspects of their businesses, while rewarding potentially bad owners for having horrible credit and no balance on or no cash on their balance sheet. Further complicating this matter, there's been no final PPP forgiveness guidance from the SBA, which just talked about with my colleagues. This, combined with the chaos of the current crisis, has led to an extremely confusing landscape for business owners to navigate as they try and carry out the purpose of the CARES Act, which is to keep hardworking Americans employed. As you know, uncertainty and confusion are the absolute worst things that a small business owner can face. And through all of this, the SBA has created more confusion for loan recipients would have had if they just not accepted the loan in the first place. Many have said to me, I'll just give the money back and lay everybody off. And that's not the purpose of this, and that's not where we want to be. I just really have one question I'd like to spend a little bit of time on. Based on all of these ever-changing rules, would you say that it more rewards somebody who has done a poor job of keeping cash on their balance sheet and has horrible credit and has absolutely nowhere else to go for loans? Or is it rewarding and creating disparity between those who have had good business practices have had cash on their balance sheet and have the ability to maybe go sell stocks at a loss, give up equity in their company or whatever in lieu of taking PPP loans based on how the rules are going now?
Based on the work that my office has conducted to this point, I can't definitively say any of that, but I could certainly see how one could come to those conclusions. I know this. You are right. We told we informed SBA before the first loan went out by looking at all the previous work that was done in these areas, the importance of guidance that was needed, solid guidance that folks could know what could do. The borrowers know what they're doing, the lenders know what they're doing. I would say this, keeping things in context, they had, if I'm not mistaken, 4 to 5 days after the act was passed to get their rules out. And I know that for the 7A program, it was just to be used as a vehicle to get the money out because it was existing, not necessarily to be the 7A program. So I know that they had those difficulties, and I just have to be fair and balanced when I conduct reviews. So that has to be in context. But yet, even before the first loan went out, the importance of that guidance, that solid guidance, was communicated, and I'm pretty sure that they would agree that how important that is.
Mr. Ware, thank you so much. Madam Chair, yield back.
The gentleman yields back. And now the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Davids, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu. And thank you to all my colleagues and the Chairwoman Velázquez and Ranking Member CHABOT also for all the work you all have been doing. So the proper implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program is absolutely critical to small businesses across the country, and definitely for the small businesses in the Kansas 3rd District, which I represent. I think everyone here recognizes that small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and definitely we need to be doing what we can to support them during this pandemic. So, Mr. Ware, I appreciate your work, your continued work, and that you're here with us today. I am also concerned about the loan forgiveness guidance, which has been a pretty big topic here of these last couple of questions. And I know the confusion that I'm hearing about from the small businesses in my community. It's been staggering hearing folks talking about, their concerns for accepting PPP money, for not being sure if they should give it back or not. There are all kinds of issues that we're seeing come up here. And I guess I just want to follow up on Mr. Golden's line of questioning, in that when the SBA was deciding to require borrowers to repay the non-forgivable portion of their PPP loan within 2 years, I know you started to talk a bit about the SBA having regulatory discretion. Were you able to determine what exactly they were considering when they decided to go with the 2 years, when they had the ability to go up to 10?
I was. From what was presented to our office, their I was going to say argument, but it's not an argument. But I can't find anything else in the spot. They contend that that was based on their projections on when businesses would be able to get back to normal because of the loan/grant that they received from SBA. That was the reason behind it. They even have a formula. They actually put that out in the guidance. They put out exactly what they felt was the reason behind that. They thought that they were doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And so did you see any concern on their side about disincentivizing smaller businesses? We've had a lot of conversation about micro businesses, as well as our veteran, minority-owned, women-owned businesses. Were they concerned at all about disincentivizing some of those businesses with such a constricted repayment time period? And that's in addition to the lack of guidance around what forgiveness would look like.
I definitely can't honestly speak about that, because that's part of it that we didn't have any discussions back and forth on that. What I aim to do in the flash report was to bring it to their attention if it wasn't already being considered. Hey, consider this. It's gonna be really tough for somebody to pay back. Just imagine if you had $1 million loan and you were only able to use 50% of it for payroll. You're gonna have to pay back $500,000 in just two years. So, I just wanted to bring that to their attention. I asked them to consider it, and I believe that they will consider it.
Thank you. Oh, good. I have 1 minute left. Can you just really quickly, in a follow-up to that, I know you mentioned that you would be exploring the loan forgiveness portion in the next report. Can we anticipate a little bit of information about that very small business and then the minority, women-owned, veteran-owned business impacts of that rule?
I'm not sure, because this particular one is one of our flash reports that's quick, so it's pretty focused. I'm not sure if that is in it, but the existing review that continues, the longer review that's continuing on PPP, may be able to dig into that a little bit more. One of the things I wanted to get across today, I mean, you all know audits, if we were to do a full audit, that takes almost a year to complete, because it's done to these to specific standards that have specific requirements. In these flash reports, we're trying to put transparency into the program and to make sure that we give suggestions that the agency can use right now to make the changes that they need to make.
Thank you, Mr. Ware, and I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentle lady yields back. And now the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is recognized for 5 minutes.
How about now? Am I on mute? Good.
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Chu and Congressman Spano, for your leadership in convening the forum. I'm pleased to participate with you. Mr. Ware, I commend your emphasis and I think the focus of a lot of the conversation here on the call today on the enormity of the task for both Treasury and SBA and the speed with which they've acted. I think your testimony included the striking fact that SBA has processed more than 20 times its largest annual loan volume in just 33 days. Did I get that right?
You're right.
That is absolutely striking. And I think SBA and all of the fine people who are working for it, and as well as Treasury, I know that's the Treasury is not the focus of what you're looking at, given your purview, but it is just a remarkable testament to the ability of federal government in the right circumstances to move very quickly. So I think that's the theme that for me dominates. You have suggested some new mandates to collect demographic information for future lending and loan forgiveness. I assume that's certainly every bit of paperwork increases burdens on applicants and banks and the SBA. Has your team calculated the burden that these recommendations would impose?
Oh, we have not. The recommendation that we have made is just that they collect the data. That's just probably a box, like the box that you check off to say, which race, ethnicity, what rural area, whatever. Yeah, but we have not. We have not, to answer your question.
Obviously, I know that when with the rules were about to come out, we were interested in how difficult it would be, and it was really important that people be able to do an application on a single page and the like. So even modest new mandates in terms of collecting information seems to be a little bit in tension with the idea that the main thrust here is to move as quickly as possible to provide relief as fast as possible. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it would be a fair assessment. Right.
And I can't see on the screen how much time I've got left. I'm sorry. Let me just keep going till some. I see. Thank you very much. 2.5 minutes. Little less than 2.5 minutes. My understanding, and I'm not fully conversant with it, is that there's an exclusion list of businesses, but some of the things that are on there are essential under directives issued by the Treasury Department, DHS, state governors, and other regulators. And just for my edification, does CARES Act discriminate against types of lawful businesses? Like, for example, could lenders or the SBA discriminate against firearms or ammunition manufacturers or oil and gas businesses or non-bank financial service providers that are otherwise licensed and regulated? Is that possible under CARES Act? From
what we reviewed, I did not see that in the CARES Act. That would fall under the type of purview, administrative purview that the Small Business Administration has, probably to align with the type of loans that they normally give to what would qualify as a small business.
Yeah. So you haven't examined whether or not, and I know you're concerned about how various constituencies were thoroughly served, but you haven't scrutinized or proposed any change in practice to scrutinize whether there's any practice of discriminating against various lawful types of businesses in the loans that are being originated. Is that correct?
That's not been anything that we've reviewed currently.
Okay. Very good. I think that's all I've got. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. And now the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for your comments thus far. What I'd like to ask you is about the SBA and Treasury Department. And basically, I heard your comments earlier. And I want to ask you that they both are involved in the PPP, and the SBA has been issuing interim final rules, and the Treasury has been issuing FAQs. Mr. Ware, can you describe the role each plays in the Paycheck Protection Program?
I could. Thank you for your question. I could tell you definitely the role the SBA plays. And SBA's role is the actual execution of the program as it relates to small businesses in the country. I don't look over Treasury per se. I am fully focused on SBA's role on this. So unfortunately, I couldn't speak more intelligently on what Treasury is doing.
Okay, well, I understand that. Well, in that case, do you find that there's confusion within SBA as a result of this role between them?
I am, from my meetings with Administrator Carranza and her staff, I know for certain that they work, Treasury and SBA are working hand in glove on this program. Neither Treasury nor SBA moves forward without the other one. So I don't believe that there's any confusion from one to the next. I believe that they're all in on whatever decision making or rule making comes out. Okay. And I've actually seen that.
Okay. Then SBA seems to, from what I understand, has been providing little insight into their process, plans for the future rules for Congress. Why do you think so?
I'm not certain. I'm under the impression based on my meetings that they do have a role.
You feel they do have a role?
That's, at least from my conversations with the administrator, that's what I'm getting. And you're asking a role in what, determining what the rules are?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, no, absolutely they have a role. And I think it's a prime and critical role that they have as well. They're in, the administrator is definitely in on every single one of those meetings to determine how these rules would impact people.
So at this particular point, even though you don't cover Treasury, and I understand that, just SBA, you don't think there needs to be more clarity, understanding that would be better off if we understood their responsibility?
I know I believe that there should be a lot more clarity in terms of the regulations that's being put out to the public, to the lenders, and to the borrowers. Regarding that relationship between SBA and Treasury, all I know is that they are in constant meetings working on these things.
I thank you for your comments. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. And now the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu, and thank you for hosting this virtual forum. And I want to thank as well the Inspector General Ware. Thank you for the work with this SBA during these unprecedented times and for joining us to discuss the report. My team's been working every day to ensure that businesses in my district have access to the vital economic resources of Congress enacted with the passage of the CARES Act. I've heard great, heartwarming stories from small businesses, ones that have been in our community oftentimes for decades, making up literally the fabric of our communities. Thankful for the hard work of the SBA in distributing assistance through the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And I'm thankful for the work the SBA has done in bringing these support programs online. Still, as we have touched on during every virtual forum this committee has held during the pandemic, there are far too many businesses left in the cold. I thank Chairwoman Velázquez for her leadership in holding the SBA accountable for its administration of these programs. And I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee to continue to exercise our oversight over the SBA. But today, one of the biggest conclusions from the Inspector General report that I want to discuss is not businesses that were unable to get PPP funds, but those that did get the funds that lacked the guidance on how to use those funds. Inspector General Ware, your initial findings concluded that potentially tens of thousands of businesses may not be eligible for loan forgiveness under the PPP. And this is even before the administration has released its formal guidance on how to ensure loan forgiveness for recipients. It is beyond frustrating to hear from businesses in my district that have received PPP funding that are literally terrified of using these funds because they don't have the guidance from the SBA or the Treasury on how to properly use the funds to ensure forgiveness. Not to mention, of course, the many businesses who have yet to receive funding under either program. So my questions for you, Mr. Ware, first, of the tens of thousands of businesses you mentioned that could be eligible, are there clusters among certain industries? Are there any trends you can point out among these recipients that can help guide the committee to legislate appropriate action to better administer the program?
Thank you for that. That's a very good question. I know that just in our quick review of that 2-week period, we found the businesses. We didn't conduct the analysis at that time to determine if there were clusters. I'm pretty sure that the ongoing review that's going on will be able to pull that information out. But I could see why that's
Great.
A vital question.
Thank you.
Vital question.
And you know, I'm sure you know that the HEROES Act, which we'll be voting on today, extends the PPP use window from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. Based on the findings of your flash report, do you have a sense of how businesses would benefit from this additional time?
Well, from my understanding of the program, that should be of great benefit to them. They don't have to rush to do the type of things that may end up in a mistake. It's evident that 8 weeks is not sufficient time based on what we now know in hindsight. I'm pretty sure that when SBA was working on putting this together, 8 weeks sounded like the wise thing to do, like the right thing to do. And they put forward an explanation that made a lot of sense. But at this time, we know that that's not enough, and 24 weeks should be a huge help to the lenders, to the small businesses.
Great. And the last question, then I'll wrap up. When Congress passed the CARES Act, we had said up to 10 years for companies to pay back the PPP loans. The decision was made along the line in the SBA to limit that to 2 years. As you touched on, many businesses could be put in a hard spot. And given the pandemic, this is the perfect example of between the rock and the hard spot. What are the impacts or what would be the impacts or benefits to companies if they could have the 10 years to pay it off? And what are going to be some of the implications of that tight squeeze time of 2 years instead?
Right. Well, it's about repayment ability, right? And your ability to repay is definitely assisted if over a longer period of time, particularly when some of the loans are for the large amounts that they were in. So that would certainly help. Now, what would also help, what's on the other side of that equation is if there wasn't such a strict rule on what qualifies as forgivable, right? So the 75% rule to us, in our opinion as an office, in combination with the 2 years, could prove to be extremely harmful to small businesses later on.
Great, thank you. And I'll wrap up. I just want to say that the businesses right now need that flexibility. They need time. They need the ability to get through this crisis, but also the time to recover and get strong again. So I hope as our committee goes forward, we can work to provide the assistance to these businesses that will get them through this crisis and secure their future. With that, I yield back and thank the chairwoman for this opportunity.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. And now the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, we know the SBA was given a nearly impossible task overnight to create a program to help every single small business across the nation that has fallen on hard times. I commend the work they've put into this. We appreciate your oversight. You can help the SBA more efficiently and effectively implement this program. Working together, we can get this right for the American people. I know your report makes recommendations for how the SBA can better align the PPP requirements with the provisions of the CARES Act, but how can we and Congress help ensure that the PPP is implemented as intended? What additional legislation or guidance can we provide in our legislative role? And I'll put myself on mute and listen to the answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Oh boy, that's a tough question. I mean, we've put forth these suggested actions for SBA. I think we can tell the impact that the 75% rule would have and the 2-year rule would have. But I think that it has to be informed by a lot more information. I know SBA has and Treasury have their reasons for why they did it that way, that they feel are very sound reasons. The thing is that in consideration of the impact that we know small businesses could be facing based on that, I just think that it's time to think about something that might work a little bit differently.
To your point, you're exactly right. We need to allow the flexibility to be able to work because there's so many different circumstances. We need that flexibility. Those small businesses are in the position through no fault of their own. We need to help them get to the pre-pandemic levels to where they were, or the best we can. And we're hearing every little, like in northern Minnesota, seasonal employment for the resort owners and the houseboat owners and other places. It's incredible, the suggestions or the ideas they have. And I think we need to remain flexible and really be able to bend when we need to on behalf of the small businesses. And I hope you agree with that.
I do, but I actually believe the CARES Act said it what it meant in it. You know what I mean? Except with once you give those type of windows, they have the administrative discretion to run the program the best way they see fit. And when it said 2 years to 10 years, that means they could say 2 years. You know, if it had said 10 years, it would have been 10 years. But it said 2 years, and based on their analysis, based on their expertise internally, they deemed that 2 years was sufficient. So, I mean, some clarifications in terms of that probably could help.
Well, I just ask if there's any legislative ideas that you have from your seat that we need to implement.
Yeah, and I don't think that. Okay, I mean, I could talk about a more definitive definition of what the intent is, rather than given all this room. Could be one way, but I don't believe that at this point where we are in terms of our oversight, that I could inform as much as I would in maybe like 30 days or 60 days as soon as we start to get the work completed. Yeah. I mean, just to be honest, I just don't want to sit here and opine on the wrong things without having all the data.
Yeah, got it. Madam Chair, yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. And now this brings us to the end of our forum. So I would like to recognize Ranking Member Spano for closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. And I thank you for being willing to have this hearing today. I think it's been very, very helpful. I would also like to thank the Inspector General Ware for being with us today. You've offered some great insight. I would love to have us look at, I hope maybe next we can discuss review potentially of the EIDL program. We've had some concerns from constituents about how that's being rolled out and whether or not that's as responsive as it should be, and applicants are getting the kind of responses on that program that they need. Concerned about that as well. But I'm so thankful for you being here. Thank you, Madam Chair, again, and appreciate all the hard work that the members of the committee have put in so far, and will continue to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spano. And I would like to thank Mr. Ware, Ranking Member Spano, and members of the committee for joining remotely to discuss this important topic. The SBA has a long history of prioritizing small businesses that cannot access capital elsewhere. And the IG and his team's work providing objective oversight to improve performance at the SBA on behalf of millions of small business owners is necessary and appreciated. The flash report we discussed today is further confirmation that the SBA and Treasury are not implementing key aspects of the PPP program as Congress intended. In certain areas, the rules either directly contradict our stated intent or are ignored altogether. SBA's failure to issue guidance to lenders and agents that prioritizes underserved businesses and those in rural markets, including women and minority-owned businesses, is unacceptable. It is my hope that the IG's work, along with further congressional oversight, will ensure that the SBA and Treasury change course. And as House Democrats work to address this health and economic crisis, we will continue to fight for struggling small businesses across the country so that they can keep their doors open and employees paid. Again, thank you, and this concludes today's forum.
Thank you.